Hello, my friends, and welcome back to chapters 4, 5, and 6 of The Secret Garden. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Chapter 4, Gardens and a Gardener. Mary went through the little gate into a big garden. It had wide lawns and winding paths, trees, flower beds, and an old gray fountain. But everything was bare, and there were no water in the fountain. At the end of the path, she came to a wall with a green door. It opened into another walled garden. Another open door led to yet another walled garden. Mary didn't know that these were the kitchen gardens for growing fruit, vegetables, and herbs. They were certainly ugly in the middle of winter, she thought. She was still exploring when an old man came through one of the doors. He carried a spade over his shoulder. He didn't seem at all happy to see Mary. In her quiet, sharp voice, she asked, "What is this place?" Gruffly, he answered, "A kitchen garden. There's another beyond that door, and an orchard on the other side of that." "Can I go and play in them?" Mary asked. "If you want, but there's nothing to see." Mary turned away and walked to the next green door. She entered a garden with beds of winter vegetables, some covered by glass frames. She found another wall with a green door which was closed. Could it be the garden that no one had entered for 10 years? Mary grabbed the door handle, hoping it wouldn't open, but the handle gave way. She entered an orchard of bare fruit trees. Walls surrounded the orchard, but no more doors. She noticed that one wall seemed to go beyond the orchard. Maybe it led to something on the other side. On a tree top behind the wall, a robin redbreast was perching. He burst into his winter song. Mary perked up. The bird's friendly whistle made her feel better, and she almost smiled. When he flew away, she wondered if she would see him again. Perhaps he lived in the mysterious locked garden. Mary was very curious about the locked garden. If Mr. Craven had loved his wife, why did he hate her garden? She walked back up to the first kitchen garden and crept up to the old man who was digging. "I visited the orchard," she reported, "but there's no door to the garden on the other side of the wall," she said crossly. "I did see a bird with a red breast in a tree top singing." The old man began to whistle, and then Mary heard a little rustle. The bird flew over to them. He perched on a clod of dirt near the gardener's foot. It was wonderful. The old man stopped digging. He asked the bird, "Where have you been, you little cheeky fella? Have you begun courting this early in the year?" The bird hopped and pecked the ground for seeds and insects. He seemed sprightly and cheerful, and Mary started to feel the same way as she watched him. "Does he always come when you whistle?" she asked. "Aye," the gardener said. "I've known him since he was a chick. Flew over from the other garden, but he was too weak to fly back for a few days. That's when we got friendly. He's a robin redbreast. They're the friendliest, most curious birds alive. See? He knows we're talking about him. He's a stuck-up one," the gardener chuckled. "Where's his family?" Mary asked. "Don't know. When he was strong enough to fly back to his nest, his brood had gone. But he's a smart. He knew he was lonely and he flew back to home." Mary took a step nearer the robin and looked at him very intently. "I'm lonely," she confided. Until then, she had only felt cross, but didn't know why. The gardener stared at her. "Coming here from India. It's no wonder," he said. Then he began to dig again. "What is your name?" Mary asked. "Ben Weatherstaff," he said. "I'm lonely too, except when he's round. He's my only friend." "I've never had a friend," Mary said. "You and me are a good bit alike," Ben Weatherstaff said. "We both have faces like sour pickles, and we both act as sour as we look. Same nasty tempers, I guess." No one had ever spoken so plainly to Mary. She wondered if she really did look as sour as he did. A clear, rippling sound broke through her thoughts. The robin had flown into so sorry. The robin had flown into an apple tree nearby and was singing. Old Ben laughed. "He wants to make friends with you." Mary looked up at the robin. In a voice as soft and eager as any child, she said, "Would you make friends with me? Would you?" "You said that so nice and human," Ben exclaimed, almost like Dickon when he talks to the wild creatures on the moor. "Do you know Dickon?" "Everybody knows him." Mary wanted to know more, but just then the robin spread his wings and flew away. Mary watched him go. She cried out, "He's flown into the garden with no door." "He lives there," said Ben. "Maybe he's courting some lady robin who lives in the old rose tree." "Are there roses in the garden?" Mary asked. She had seen roses in India. "There were 10 years ago," Ben mumbled to himself. "Where's the door?" Mary asked. "Nowhere anyone can find," Ben said roughly. "And it's nobody's business. Don't you go poking your nose where it don't belong. Get on now and play. I've got work to do." Then he hoisted his spade onto his shoulder and trudged away. Chapter 5. A Cry in the House. For a while, every day was like Mary's first. Martha would bring her breakfast and help her dress. Mary would complain more than she ate. Then she'd go outside to explore the gardens. But after several days, she woke up feeling hungry. "It tastes nice today," she said of her porridge. "It's the fresh moor air that's given you an appetite," said Martha. "You keep playing outdoors, it'll soon put flesh on your bones and colour in your cheeks." "I have nothing to play with," Mary replied. "Oh, you've got sticks and stones," Martha exclaimed. "My brothers and sisters play with what they can find. They run and shout and look at things." Mary did look at things in the gardens. Sometimes she saw Ben Weatherstaff, but he was always too busy to pay attention to her. She discovered a long walkway outside the garden walls where thick ivy grew. Mary found a place at the end of the walkway where the ivy was extra thick and bushy. She wondered why it had not been trimmed like the rest. One day she was staring up at a long tendril of ivy swinging in the wind. Suddenly she saw a flash of red. The robin redbreast perched atop the wall. "Oh!" she cried out. "Is it you?" It didn't seem odd to talk to him. He twittered and chirped back. To Mary, it seemed that he was saying, "Good morning," and inviting her to come along with him. Mary laughed. She ran after him as he hopped and took short flights. "I like you," she cried out. She made chirping sounds and tried to whistle, and the robin seemed pleased. He flew up to a tree top to sing behind the orchard wall on the other side of the garden. "He must live in the garden without a door," she thought. Mary ran up the path and back through the kitchen gardens to the orchard. She went straight to the wall where she had just first seen him. There he was, just finishing his concert. "It is the secret garden," she said to herself. "I am sure it is." She searched again for a door in the orchard wall, but still found nothing. So she ran all the way back to the long path that wound along the ivy-covered wall. She walked up and down, searching very carefully, but still no door. That night, Martha chatted amiably while Mary ate. Mary didn't mind listening to her now. When Mary finished her supper, she and Martha sat near the fireplace. The wind was howling outside. It banged at the windows like an invisible giant trying to break in. But by the fire they felt safe and warm. Mary asked, "Why did Mr. Craven hate the garden?" Although hesitant, Martha tried to explain. "Mm, it was his wife's, and she loved it. Mr. and Mrs. Craven tended the flowers themselves. None of the gardeners ever went in. The two of them would stay there for hours, just reading and talking. It was an old tree with a branch that bent like a seat. Mrs. Craven liked to sit there, but one day the branch broke and she fell. She was hurt so badly that she died the next day. That's why Mr. Craven hates it. Mrs. Medlock says nobody can talk about it or about lots of other things." Mary fell silent. She was thinking about Mr. Craven and how sad he must be, when just then she heard a curious sound like a child crying. She was sure that it was coming from inside. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Martha looked confused. She said, "It's the wind. Sometimes it sounds like someone's lost on the moor crying for help." "But it's here," Mary insisted, "down one of the corridors." At that instant a strong gust blew open Mary's door with a crash. The light went out. The sound of the cry grew louder than ever. "I told you!" Mary shouted. "Someone is crying, and it isn't a grown-up!" Martha jumped up. They both heard a door somewhere being banged shut. "Ah, it must be the new kitchen maid crying," Martha said stubbornly. "She has an awful toothache." Mary stared hard at Martha. Inside, she knew that Martha was not telling the truth. Chapter 6. Opening Doors. It rained the next day, and the moor almost disappeared into the gray mist. Mary would not be able to go outside. "What does your family do when it rains?" she asked Martha. "Oh, mostly we try to keep from getting under each other's feet," Martha chuckled. "The older children play in the cowshed, but Dickon goes out like it was a sunny day. Once he found a half-drowned fox cub and brought it home. Another time he found a young crow and named it Soot because it was so black. Now it goes everywhere with him." "If I had a fox or a crow, I could play with it," Mary said. "Can you read? You could read a book or work on your spelling," Martha suggested. "I can, but all my books were left in India," Mary said. Martha had an idea. "There are thousands of books in the library. Mrs. Medlock might let you in." But Mary had another idea. When Martha left, Mary stood at her window and thought of a plan. She didn't care much for the library, but it reminded her of the 100 rooms with closed doors. Were they all locked? What was inside them? If there really were 100, she could count them. At least it would be something to do. She quietly left her room and entered a long hallway that branched off into other ones. There were doors everywhere and pictures on the walls. She wandered into a long gallery. Its walls were covered with paintings of men and women in grand costumes of satin and velvet. Mary continued to explore. One room down the hall seemed to be a lady's sitting room with embroidered velvet covering the walls. A little cabinet displayed dozens of little elephants made of ivory. Mary had lived in India, so she knew all about elephants. She played with the ivory elephants until she grew tired and decided to return to her room. But she had lost her way. She came to a tapestry hanging at the end of a short hallway. She tried to decide which way to go. A cry broke out through the stillness. It wasn't like the crying she had heard the night before. This time it was a short, childish whine. Her heart began beating fast. "It is crying," she said to herself, "and it's nearer than last night." She brushed against the tapestry by mistake. To her surprise, she opened a hidden door. Mary could see down another hall, and at the end of it, Mrs. Medlock was coming toward her, carrying a bunch of keys. She looked very cross. "What are you doing here?" Mrs. Medlock demanded. She took Mary's arm and pulled her away. "I took a wrong turn," Mary began, "and then I heard someone crying." "You didn't hear anything of the sort," Mrs. Medlock snapped. "Go to your room now, or I'll box your ears." Mrs. Medlock pulled Mary down the twisting hallways back to her room. "Stay where you're told, or you'll be locked in," the housekeeper warned sharply. Then she left, slamming the door. Mary sat by the fireplace. She was furious, but she didn't cry. She thought about what she discovered that morning: the maze of rooms, the ivory elephants, and the crying. Some day she would discover who it was. Okay, my friends, that ends The Secret Garden, chapters 4, 5, and 6. You guys have a great day. Make sure you come on back next week for the rest of the story. Bye bye.